In 1997, Shania Twain and producer Mutt Lange released Come On Over, the best-selling country album of all time. This is the story of two people who had no business being in Nashville, and how they walked in and took the whole town over. One of them was a Canadian whose first album barely sold. The other was a South African record producer who had never made a country song in his life, and who most of country radio had never even heard of. Between them, they did not just break Nashville's rules. They proved those rules had never really protected anything in the first place. And the people who ran the place spent the better part of a decade trying to work out how it happened. To understand the size of what they pulled off, you first have to understand the machine they walked straight past. In the early 1990s, Nashville ran like a factory, and a very good one. The system had a name, Music Row, and it worked the same way for almost everybody who passed through it. A singer got signed. The label then handed that singer songs, written by a small, trusted circle of professional songwriters who supplied the whole town. A staff producer shaped the sound. The label managed the image, planned the radio campaign, booked the tour. The artist sang, and almost everyone else decided. It was cautious, it was disciplined, and for decades it manufactured stars with remarkable reliability. The one thing the machine was never built to reward was an outsider who showed up with their own ideas and no intention of handing them over. At the top of that machine, in those years, stood Garth Brooks, the undisputed king of 90s country music, the man who had turned Nashville into a stadium sport. The town was built around what he represented. Shania Twain would outsell even him. That's exactly what walked in. Her name was Eileen, and she came from Timmins, a mining town in northern Ontario, about as far from Music Row as a singer could possibly start. Before Nashville, she'd spent years performing at Deerhurst Resort in Ontario, singing covers to hold her family together, a detail the town would later use to dismiss her, and one she'd eventually use to prove them wrong. By the time Nashville met her, she was going by Shania, a name drawn from her stepfather's Ojibwe heritage, and said to mean, "I'm on my way." It suited her. She'd spent years singing in clubs and resorts to hold her family together after losing both of her parents young, and she arrived in town with talent, ambition, and almost no leverage at all. In 1993, a producer brought her to Nashville to cut her first album. It was called simply Shania Twain, released through Mercury Nashville Records, and by the standards of the system, it did almost nothing. The record moved about 100,000 copies, a quiet disappointment. Worse, from her point of view, she'd had very little say in any of it. She was handed songs to sing. She was told what the album would be. She'd been run through the machine exactly as designed, and the machine spat out a modest, forgettable result and moved on to the next one. By every normal measure, that should have been the end of it. New artist, weak debut, quietly let go. But that flop did one thing that mattered enormously, even if nobody noticed at the time. It got seen by the one person on earth least likely to be watching country music at all. Robert John Lange, known to everyone who worked with him as Mutt, was not a Nashville man. He was not even American. Born in Africa and based in England, he was, by the early 90s, one of the most successful record producers alive, and almost nobody outside the industry could have picked him out of a lineup. That was deliberate. Lange did not give interviews. He avoided cameras. He stayed out of the press for years at a stretch and let the records talk for him. And the records were monsters. Lange produced AC/DC's Highway to Hell, and then Back in Black, which became one of the best-selling albums in the entire history of recorded music. He made Pyromania and Hysteria with Def Leppard, building a towering, polished, impossibly loud wall of arena rock that defined how the 80s sounded. He worked with Foreigner. He co-wrote and produced for Bryan Adams, including a ballad that seemed to live at #1 for an entire summer. This was a man who built stadium anthems for a living, who stacked vocals until they sounded like a choir of 100 people, who would obsess over a single syllable until the whole record gleamed. Country music was not on his resume. It was not anywhere near it. Then, he saw Shania Twain's video. And Mutt, the recluse who could have worked with practically any artist on the planet, picked up the telephone and called a country singer whose album had just flopped. He reached her through her label, and they started talking. Then they started writing songs together, over the phone, across an ocean. Two people who had never stood in the same room trading melodies and lines down a telephone line. They finally met in person at Nashville's Fanfare in June of 1993. By December, they were married. So look at the partnership Nashville was suddenly dealing with. A failed country newcomer with no real power and a rock super producer who had never made a country record and did not depend on the town for a single thing. On paper, it was the least likely creative marriage in the genre. In practice, it was a takeover plan, and the first move was the boldest one of all. They ignored the machine completely. When the two of them made Twain's second album, The Woman in Me, they did not draw from Music Row's circle of staff songwriters. They wrote the songs themselves, just the two of them, sitting with the material until it was theirs. They did not hand the sound to a label producer either. Lange produced it, and he produced it the way he produced everything, with thick, stacked vocals, enormous hooks, and a backbeat you could feel in your chest before you could name it. He took the twang of country and bolted it straight onto the architecture of arena rock, a country pop crossover sound that Nashville had no real category for. On some of those tracks you can hear it without even trying. The chants, the layered harmonies, the sheer size of the thing. At moments it sounds like a country record made by the man who made Hysteria, because that is precisely what it was. This was not how Nashville albums got built. And when The Woman in Me came out in 1995, it did something Nashville albums almost never did at that altitude. It sold around 12 million copies in the United States. The first single, Any Man of Mine, only reached number 11 on the Billboard country chart, a soft opening by any measure, and it did not matter in the slightest. The album just kept selling and selling and selling long after the moment it was supposed to fade. Then came the part that genuinely offended the establishment. Shania Twain didn't tour behind it. Not at first. The hottest new act in country music declined to do the one thing every country act was expected to do, which was climb on a bus and play a few hundred shows a year for as long as the song stayed hot. The whispers started almost immediately. If she wouldn't tour, the thinking went, maybe she couldn't. Maybe she was a studio invention, a striking face assembled by her famous husband behind a mixing desk. Maybe she couldn't really sing at all. The most successful newcomer in the genre was being quietly written off as a special effect. The resistance wasn't subtle, and it came from several directions at once. Her music video for an early single, the one where she bared her midriff and played opposite a shirtless leading man, got pulled from CMT. The look was judged too much for country television at the time, and here's the irony, one that would only sharpen over the next few years. The exact image they banned was the image that would help make her one of the most recognizable women on the planet. The reviews could be brutal, and a lot of the venom had nothing to do with the music. She has recalled some of the lines herself, years later, that she was selling sex rather than songs, that she was a flash in the pan who would be gone within a year, that the most remarkable thing about her was her bare stomach. The subtext, and very often the actual text, was that a woman who looked like that and sold like that couldn't possibly be a serious artist, and certainly not a serious country artist, never mind that she had co-written every song on the record. Running underneath the sexism was the purist complaint, the one that would shadow her for the rest of the decade. This isn't country. It's too pop. It's too rock. It's too slick, too commercial, too foreign to the form. And in a sense, all of that was true. It was every one of those things at once. That was the entire point. If The Woman in Me was the breach in the wall, the next record was The Flood. In 1997, Twain and Lange released Come On Over, and here the pop-country crossover takeover became something close to total, because they did something almost nobody in country music had attempted at that scale. They built the album twice. There was a country version, mixed for Nashville and for American country radio, with the fiddle and the steel guitar sitting right where country listeners expected to find them. And there was a second version, a pop version, the same songs remixed to pull back the twang and shove the hooks forward, aimed squarely at pop radio and at the rest of the world. Same songs, two different coats of paint. One album quietly engineered to conquer two markets that had spent decades insisting they had nothing to do with each other. It was less a record than a strategy, and the strategy was to refuse to choose. It worked beyond anything the genre had ever witnessed. They released a dozen of the album's 15 tracks as singles. You're Still the One, Man, I Feel Like a Woman, and From This Moment On were among them, an almost absurd number. They kept the record alive on the Billboard country chart and on the pop charts for years on end. The figures it put up are still hard to believe. Come On Over became the best-selling country album of all time. It became the best-selling studio album ever recorded by a woman, in any genre. It became the best-selling album ever made by a Canadian artist. Worldwide, it has sold more than 40 million copies. In the United States alone, it sold more than 20 million. It collected 6 Grammy nominations, including Album of the Year, the kind of broad, all-genre recognition Nashville rarely came anywhere near. And when she finally did take the show on the road, the tour that followed grossed more than $40 million. The Outsiders had not merely gotten in. They had outsold nearly everyone who was already inside, including Garth Brooks, the man the whole town had been built around. Here's the thing the gatekeepers never quite reckoned with. Every barrier they raised, Twain and Lange simply walked around. The town's songwriters were off limits, so they wrote their own songs. The staff producers weren't an option, so Lange ran the board himself. She wouldn't tour the way she was told to, and the records sold anyway. They banned the video, and the look became iconic. They said it wasn't real country, and it became the best-selling country album in history. One by one, every rule turned out to be optional. The only thing it ever took was a willingness to be the outsider who declined to follow it. And the proof is in everyone who came afterward. Taylor Swift has credited Twain as a central reason she ever believed a country artist could cross into pop at all. Carrie Underwood has said plainly that Twain paved the way. That blurred line between Nashville and everywhere else, the very thing that defines mainstream country today, was drawn by a Canadian and a South African who, by the rules of their time, should never have been allowed near the building. The partnership itself didn't last forever. Their marriage came apart years later, and the man who never wanted his photograph taken withdrew even further from view than before. But by then, the work was long finished. The wall was already gone, and it wasn't coming back. Which brings us back to where we began. Two people who had no business being in Nashville. A singer whose first record barely sold, and a producer who had never written a country song in his life. They didn't ask the town for permission, and the town never did figure out how to stop them. By the time anyone fully understood what had happened, the rules they broke had quietly hardened into the new rules. And country music has been running on them ever since.